So, today we're going to tackle a really heavy but important topic: apartheid. It was the system of institutionalized racial segregation in South Africa. And even though the laws themselves were dismantled decades ago, you can still feel its shadow today, shaping the country's social and economic landscape. So, let's get into it. How was this system even built, and why is its legacy still so powerful?
Okay, so first things first, the word apartheid. It's an Afrikaans word and it literally means separateness. And that's exactly what it was, a really brutal system of racial segregation enforced by the white minority government in South Africa. Officially, it ran from 1948 all the way up to the early 1990s. The whole foundation of apartheid was this rigid racial hierarchy. I mean, it was incredibly strict. White citizens were put at the very top. Then you had Indians, then coloreds, and right at the very bottom were Black Africans. And here's the key thing. This wasn't just some unspoken social rule. No, this was the law.
So, the big question is, how on earth does an idea like separateness become the actual law of the land? Well, it wasn't random. It was a very, very carefully constructed legal framework built on two different but connected ideas. So the system basically had two parts, which historians call grand apartheid and petty apartheid. Think of it like this. Grand apartheid was the big picture stuff, where you could live, what jobs you could have, all based on your race. Then you had petty apartheid. That was the nitty-gritty, day-to-day segregation. We're talking separate buses, separate beaches, even separate park benches. So one designed the prison, and the other policed every single move you made inside it.
And what's just wild is how fast they built this system. As soon as the National Party got into power, they just unleashed this flood of new laws. One of the biggest was the Population Registration Act of 1950. This was absolutely crucial. It literally classified every single person by race. From there, the Group Areas Act told you where you could live, and other laws like the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act went so far as to control who you could marry. I mean, this was social engineering on an unimaginable scale, all written down and enforced as law.
Right, but it's important to understand that a system like this doesn't just pop up out of nowhere in 1948. Not at all. It was really the culmination of a long, long history of racial discrimination. So let's back up a little and see where it all came from.
Yeah, the truth is, policies of segregation had been around for a long, long time before 1948. It really started back in the 17th century with Dutch colonization. Then in the 1800s, the British brought in what they called pass laws to control where Black people could go. And as you can see here, by the early 1900s, you had laws like the Natives Land Act and the Urban Areas Act. These were the real building blocks for the total segregation that was about to come. And then came the big turning point, the 1948 election. This is where it all became official. The National Party literally ran on a platform called apartheid. They didn't hide it. They promised voters this new policy to guarantee continued white domination. And guess what? They won. And they got to work turning that terrifying promise into reality almost immediately.
When you talk about who was behind all this, one name always comes up: Hendrik Verwoerd. He was a minister and later prime minister, and his role in creating and enforcing these laws was so central that he's gone down in history as the architect of apartheid.
Okay, so we've talked about the laws and the politics, but what did this actually feel like for people? Let's shift gears now and look at the devastating human cost and how this system literally tore a society apart. Just look at that number for a second. 3.5 million. That is the estimated number of Black Africans who were forcibly kicked out of their homes between 1960 and 1983. Think about that. We're talking about one of the largest mass forced removals in modern history, all done to create these racially pure areas. So, where did all these people go? Well, most were shoved into one of 10 designated tribal homelands, which were also known as Bantustans. And get this, these territories were often just barren land, and altogether they made up just 13% of the country for the vast majority of the population. This whole Bantustan system was really the heart of Grand Apartheid, and you can still see its fingerprints today in all the debates about land and wealth inequality. And this, right here, just shows you the connection perfectly. On one side, you've got the map of the Bantustans. You can see how they're all broken up, these little isolated pockets of land. And on the other side, that's the human cost. A man being forced from his home, his entire life destroyed because of some abstract line somebody drew on a map. And here's the really sinister endgame of the whole homeland system.
The ultimate goal was to completely strip Black South Africans of their citizenship. The government's grand plan was to eventually declare these Bantustans independent nations. So overnight, millions would become foreigners in the very country they were born in. Of course, this division was also deeply economic. Just take a look at this graph. It's pretty stark, right? That line way up at the top, that's the income of white South Africans, which is the baseline at 100%. Now, look down. You can see that massive gap between them and the incomes for Asian, colored, and especially Black South Africans. The system wasn't just about separation. It was designed from the ground up for economic exploitation. But look, a system built on this much injustice, it can't last forever. It was just unsustainable. It sparked incredible resistance, both inside South Africa and all around the world, that would, eventually, bring about a new dawn. So what brought it down? Well, it was a combination of things. You had massive international pressure. The UN was constantly condemning apartheid, which led to some serious economic sanctions. At the same time, inside South Africa, resistance groups like the African National Congress, the ANC, were becoming more and more active. This, of course, led to absolutely brutal government crackdowns and so much tragic violence that left thousands and thousands dead. By the end of the 1980s, the pressure was just too much to handle. The government actually started secret talks with the ANC. Then came 1990, and this was a moment the whole world was watching. Nelson Mandela was finally released from prison after 27 long years. Just a year after that, the main apartheid laws were officially scrapped. And then, in April 1994, a totally new chapter began. South Africa held its first ever truly democratic elections, where everyone of every race could vote. But here's the thing. Getting rid of the laws, that's not the same as erasing the legacy. Not even close. The deep economic and social wounds from all those years of apartheid are still very much a part of South African society today, especially when you look at the huge inequality that still exists. And really, that leaves us with a huge question to ponder. When a country's entire system, its laws, its economy, its very geography, was designed for decades to break people apart, how does a nation like that even begin to rebuild? How does it become whole again?